Welcome to Story Jam Theater. I'm your host, Chris Krimitsos. If you're moved and inspired by stories, then you're in the right place. On today's show, Marc Ensign shares how he broke into an unbreakable industry, Broadway. This is one of the best told stories ever told at a Story Jam. Enjoy Marc's story, and remember, anything is possible.
So I graduated from Berklee College of Music with a degree in music performance and a dream to work on Broadway. I wanted to perform on a Broadway stage, which in and of itself is actually pretty funny because at the time, I'd never actually been to a Broadway show. I didn't graduate from High School Musical, and college was nothing like the movie Fame. But for me, as a professional musician, there was nothing more exciting or big than working on Broadway. That was the epitome of success to me as a professional musician. So that's what I went after. And so like any good college student dreams of, I moved back in with my mom after I graduated. And she lived right outside in New Jersey. And so it was very easy for me to get into the city. And at the time, the internet was in its infancy. So all we really had, there wasn't that much information online. There was just pretty much chat rooms and porn, and I had exhausted both of those. So it was time to actually come up with another plan. So I would head into the city every night and go to the theater, and go to every theater that I could possibly find that had a Broadway show, and I would steal a playbill. And my plan was that if I stole this playbill, I would have the name of everybody that performed that show. Everybody in the orchestra. So night after night for weeks until I had a stack of playbills for every show that was open on Broadway. And then I went over to the Musicians Union because when you go to the Musicians Union and you're a member of Local 802, you would get like a directory of all the names and addresses and phone numbers of everybody that was in the union, which is everybody that was on Broadway. So I went over to the union and they said I couldn't join. Apparently, you can't join unless you have a gig, but you can't get a gig without joining. So it didn't make any sense. So I did what any rational person would do. I went into the city the next day with a wire cutter, and I stole a phone book from a payphone at the train station. And in that phone book, I was able to get about 50% of the address, the names that I had found in these playbills. And so I started writing. I wrote them a letter, sent them a resume, sent them a demo tape, and sent out about 100 of them, and nothing. Didn't get a single call. So a week later, I tried back. I said, oh, let me call them. I'll follow up, make sure they got it. Maybe they didn't get it, didn't put enough stamps on it or something. And so I called every single one of them, and I heard the same thing. You're too young, too inexperienced, you're not very good, you need to practice, you don't know enough people, you wasted your money on your education. I said, okay. But there's one guy, his name was John Monaco, and he was a musical director for a number of shows. And so he was actually pretty nice to me compared to everybody else. His story was, I can't talk to you. I got your package. I can't help you. You're not a member of the union. Go join the union, and I'll be happy to help you. I said, okay. So the next day, I run over to Local 802, and I said, hey, I need to join the union. I was told by John Monaco that I should be a member. And so she said, oh, so you got the gig? So John Monaco told me to join the union. What do you think? So she goes, oh, that's great. Oh, congratulations. I got the congratulations. Apparently John Monaco is directing a new show, and they thought I was the bass player. So I got him. So from that point on, I was a card-carrying member of Local 802. And so I went home. I raced home, and I called John Monaco, and I said, hey, look, I got my card, here's the number, what do I need to do? And he said, okay, well, you're barking up the wrong tree. You don't need to be talking to musical directors. You don't need to be talking to guitar players and drummers and trumpet players. You need to be talking to bass players. That's who you want to replace. That's who you want to sub for. Call the bass players. I said, great. So I called all the bass players that day, just picked up the phone, just started dialing, calling every bass player. I heard that I wasn't experienced enough. I wasn't good enough. I was too young. I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't connected enough. My education was a waste of money. So that wasn't going to deter me. I figured, I started thinking about it, gave it a week or two, and it occurred to me that I have nothing to offer these people. They have a gig that I want, and I'm giving them nothing in return. I just want something. So I got to fix this. So I call them all up again. I said, hey, this is like 2 weeks later. I'm writing an article for Bass Player magazine about what it's like to work on Broadway. Now, Bass Player magazine was the biggest bass magazine in the world at the time. Would you like to be in the story? I'll feature you in the story. Every single bass player said yes. So all of a sudden I had a meeting with every bass player where I figured I'd interview them, find out what the hell they need for me to get this gig. And so I had an interview with every bass player. I got to sit in the pit of every single show on Broadway. I got to copy the music from every show on Broadway. I got to meet every single musician in the pit, and I was the guy. So it was perfect. It was the perfect plan with one exception. I didn't write for Bass Player magazine. And they were expecting an article. So after I had talked to everybody, okay, I got all the information I needed. Now I think I can get the gig. But what I did was I called Bass Player magazine. I figured, why not? So I called Bass Player magazine. I said, look, I'm friends with all these people that work on Broadway, and I wrote an article about what it's like to be a bass player on Broadway. Would you guys be interested? And they said, we'll take it. Send it over to us. Perfect. Except I didn't write the article. I just interviewed the people. So now I have to write this article. They're expecting the article. They're expecting. So I write this article and I get it out. So they actually gave me $400 for it, which was hilarious because I was going to give it to them for free, just to save a little face. And I sent the article came out in the magazine, and I followed up with a phone call. And everybody said, thank you for the article. So I said, great, now what about the show? Is there any chance I can get on the show? It's this thing where I gave you something, now I want something. And they said, well, you're too young. You're not experienced. You're not good enough. You're not connected enough. So your education was a waste of money. But there was one guy that was really, really nice to me. He said, I can't tell you how much it meant to me to be in that. And he just kept saying that. So I was like, well, let's talk about it over dinner. And so I took him out to dinner, and I was all ready with my pitch. I was going to get this show. I was going to knock this out of the park. And he was talking about his dad. And his dad was a bass player. And his dad had passed away 15 years earlier. And I didn't know at the time, but his dad had played for all these incredible musicians. He was the bass player for Bob Dylan, for Jim Croce, for all these amazing, amazing performers. The problem was back then they didn't actually put your name in the liner notes. What they did was they just never heard of you. You were a studio guy. You came in, recorded the record, and you left, and nobody ever heard of you. And he died, and he never got the notoriety that he wanted. Now here is this guy that's been struggling with this his entire life, and he now got the notoriety that his dad never got. And it was such an amazing, just seeing the pain on this guy's face. And so I threw my pitch out, and I was like, you know what? I need to write an article about your dad. I'm the only guy here that can actually pull this thorn out of his paw. Let me write this article for you. And I can't make any promises, but I'm gonna do everything I can to get it published. And so I wrote an article called "The Most Famous Bass Player You've Never Heard of." And I worked my ass off, and I got that article in the magazine. And he and I hung out, and we listened to records. He told me stories. I saw pictures of Bob Dylan with a cigarette pushing a baby carriage, and that was him. It was amazing. And so the article came out, and it never followed up. I didn't do the pitch, and I didn't do the now what do you have for me, because it suddenly wasn't about that anymore. This is about what I can do for him and how I can give to him and add value, and then just walk away. So about a month after the article comes out, he calls me up and he said, hey, I just wanted to find out, what are you doing the second week in January? I'm going to give you a chance. On Sunday, the Sunday matinee is, I'm going on vacation, and I'll give you the Sunday matinee, but just keep in mind, if you blow it, you will never work on Broadway again. So it's October, I have 3 months. And so for 3 months, I ran the show in my bedroom 2 times a day. I ran the show with the lights off, with the lights on. I had flashlights that I pointed towards my face to mimic the lights on stage. I would kick the music stand over to see if I was able to recover with the music on the ground. I put the music out of order to see if I can figure it out. I would play without music. Every time I was in the car, I would hum the bass line. That's all I listened to for 3 months. On the weekends, on Saturday morning, I would head into the city, and I would sit back and I would watch backstage. I would watch the show behind the bass player for the 3 hours, 2 hours. And then they would all go to dinner, and I would play the show with my headphones on in the seat that I would be sitting in. And then they would come back, and I'd sit and watch the second show. And I do this twice, Saturday and Sunday. For 3 months, I practiced the show every single day. I went and watched the show 4 times a week. I lived and breathed and ate this thing. It's all I would listen to. I wouldn't even spoil my brain with other music. It's all I would listen to. And so the months went by, and by the time it was my shot, I was going into the city. I had already played the show on Broadway. I had played it hundreds of times in my brain. Not a night went by that I didn't picture every single note in that show in my head. I played every single note in my head. And so when it was time to actually play the show, I had already done it. It was old news. I already got the standing ovation. I was good. Now it was just a matter of just showing everybody, like everybody was catching up with where I was a month or 2 months ago. And so, I got there, set up my stuff, totally relaxed, was completely in the moment. And I kicked its ass. I killed the show. And so when I got home, by the time I traveled from the stage to my house, there was a message on the machine from his while he was on vacation that said, "Hey, I don't know what you did, but the musical director recommended and highly suggested that I make you my #1 sub. Congratulations." And so within a year, I was on tour with the show. And apparently, I was old enough, I was good enough, and my education wasn't a waste of money. Thank you.
In case you're wondering, Marc Ensign got his big break with the show Rent and traveled with them for over 10 years. If you'd like to see a picture of Marc Ensign, make sure to go to StoryJamTheater.com and make sure to live a life worth telling, and we'll see you next week.
This has been a Story Jam Theater podcast. Production support provided by Anthony Kovic of Real Video Production and Stuart Mackey of Mackey Productions. All stories are true as affirmed by the storytellers. Special thanks to the Film Commission of Florida, The Hive, and the Tampa Bay area.